Hey, and welcome back to Eigen Designs, and today I'm excited to be building a really stylish sign for my son Andy out of some reclaimed 1x10 boards that used to be some shelving. So in this video, we're going to be using the CNC as well as some spray paint and some stain to make the sign for my son who's really into construction vehicles right now. This is a great way to personalize and decorate your living space, so let's get after it. Recently, one of my neighbors disassembled some shelving in his house and offered me some 1x10 pine boards. And of course, I said yes to free wood. So after taking some initial measurements, the boards were about 2 feet long and 9 inches wide. And unfortunately, this is just wider than my 8-inch jointer. But I did notice that every board had some screw holes along one side, so I thought about ripping that section off so the boards were narrow enough to fit through the jointer. So to do this, step one was to take the boards over to the jointer and put a nice 90-degree fresh edge along the long side of each of the board. This would allow me to run these boards through my table saw and get a really nice parallel edge while cutting off the screw holes and making them narrow enough to run them through my jointer face down. So once I did that, I had at least one straight face that I could then reference against to run through my planer. I ran the boards through until they were all the same thickness, trying to leave them as thick as possible. I then take 3 of the boards and glue up a larger rectangular panel from which I will cut a circular disc from, and that will be the main back part of the sign. The sign is going to be made of 3 main components, and the first component that I'm going to tackle is the circular back plate that's going to serve as the base of the sign. There's a couple of different ways that you can cut out circular pieces from rectangular wooden stock. Given that I've got a CNC and this sign is within capacity of my machine, I'm going to go ahead and do it there, but if you had a bandsaw, there's a clever trick that you can use to actually cut out a circular pattern from a bandsaw. Next on the list was to create the actual lower panel that's going to have 3 of the trucks. I made a circular arc along the bottom that followed the same radius of curvature as the actual circle that I just designed. And then I took some vector files from each of the 3 trucks and placed them on top of that arc, and then I extruded that solid surface up. We're then going to use that outline to create a 2-dimensional contour cutout using one of the CNC bits to give our CNC a tool path to etch out this particular design. The last component of the sign is the actual name that we're going to be carving. And I want this name to be one continuous piece of wood, so I went with a cursive design. And unfortunately, the fonts that are available in Fusion 360 did not allow enough material between each of the letters to actually carve out the design the way that I was hoping for. So to get around this, I actually went to a free site on the internet that has different cursive or calligraphy designs, and I exported that as an SVG vector file and imported that into this layer within my Fusion 360 model, and then created a toolpath based on that. This ended up being a pretty effective workaround. With each of the sign components now designed and exported as G-code, it was time to put my CNC to work. I started off with the larger rectangular panel where I cut the circular shape out from. Next up was the bottom piece of the sign that had the outline of each of the construction cars. I elected to cut out the inner pieces first and then transition to the outside design. That way, if the piece happens to move once the outside design is cut, the interior pieces have already been etched out. The third and final piece was actually the cursive name that was going to be etched out of the wood. Now, I do want to take this time to mention that I'm using this pine board to make the letters and the cutouts because it's available and it was free, and I am a big proponent of using reclaimed wood where possible. But if I were to be going to the store to buy materials for a project like this, I would pick up a sheet of 1/4-inch MDF. MDF is a manufactured product that doesn't have the same flaws as a wooden panel like this. It's not nearly as thick, and for this application, for the letters and for the construction car cutouts, you don't need it to be thick. And you also don't have to contend with imperfections in the wood like grain irregularities, knots, holes in the wood, those types of things. So I'm using this because it's what I had, and I wanted to make use of something that was given to me. But if you were going to go out and buy this on your own, MDF would be a much better application for you. Once I had the lettering cut out, I took extreme caution when disassembling the letters from the stock piece because there's very little material between some of the letters, and I was making sure not to apply any twisting or pulling action that could jeopardize this particular piece. The nice thing about doing a project like this is that there's very little sanding that you have to do. I just do a once over with 220 grit sandpaper to remove any burrs that are left over, and I sanded the cursive writing by hand because it was such a delicate piece. Once the sanding was done, I then took a router with a 1/2-inch roundover bit just to put a nice soft edge around the exterior of the circular board. For the two pieces that are going on top of the sign, I hit them with a few coats of white spray paint. It took a few coats to make sure that I got all angles of each of the nooks and crannies on the inside and around the perimeter of this particular piece. I did the same thing with the cursive writing, and then I coated both of them with some lacquer to protect the paint that I just put on. Next up, it was time to stain the circular backer board of the sign. And I thought, who's better help to enlist but the recipient of the sign, Mr. Andy himself. And Daddy's going to put a little bit of stain on, and you're going to run this back and forth, okay? Now, it's important to only touch the sponge with this hand, okay? You can't touch it with your right hand. Okay, so grab this. Grab this with this hand. Yeah.
Don't touch the other hand.
And paint it on here. Just paint it back and forth. Yep, you're good. Back and forth.
Jingle bells. And why jingle bells?
Okay, keep going.
It's going round.
Just like that.
We need more than that.
No, we have plenty of stain. Don't worry about that. There we go.
Mom, wants to go build a house. Mommy, look way down.
Wow. So Daddy's just going to come through and...
Yes.
Once Picasso had done a number on the board, I then come back and wipe off all the excess stain with a dry microfiber towel. After giving the stain ample time to dry, I then hit it with some aerosol polyurethane, and it took about 3 coats to get the coverage that I wanted. I would have liked to use lacquer here, but I actually ran out, so I had to use polyurethane. Nothing wrong with poly, it just takes a long time to dry, and you have to wait longer in between each coat. One final step before assembling the sign was to put a hanger on the back side of the board so that the sign can be hung from a nail or a screw in the wall. There's a couple of different ways you could assemble a sign like this. I thought about using some brad nails and then coming back and patching the holes up, but I thought a simpler solution would just be to use some CA glue and some activator because it's quick, and if there is any glue squeeze out, it's going to be clear. And this isn't a piece that's ever going to see any wear and tear. This is going to be hung up on the wall and then forgotten about. So I thought this was the most simple solution for the application at hand. The final sign turned out fantastic. I think the white lettering and the silhouettes of the construction cars are a really good contrast to the darker stain of the wood that it sits in front of. And a sign like this could be customized an infinite number of ways with different names, different symbols or silhouettes of items along the bottom part of the sign. But because you've got the 3D lettering and silhouette of the truck sitting on top of the sign, it gives a little bit of depth and dimension to the sign, which just makes it that much more interesting. So for those of you out there who have a CNC or are thinking about getting one, this is another idea to keep in the back of your mind, because it can be a great gift and it can be a great customizable thing that you can make on Etsy for folks that are looking to monetize their hobby. This is another great one to consider. All right, that's going to be it for this video. Appreciate you sticking around to the end. There's a lot more CNC content coming, so I'll see you on the next one.